Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very welcome to the Swedish Institute of International Affairs and this lecture on the 10-year anniversary of the Eastern Partnership. My name is Martin Krag. I'm the head of the Russia and Eurasia program here with the Institute, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers today. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, Mr. Zhohrab Mnatsakanyan, and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Vladimir Prystaiko. We will have about 30 minutes or so for each minister, after which we have intended to leave room and discussion, and leave some room also for discussion and questions. Again, very welcome. Thank you for coming here to our institute and to Stockholm. Mr. Zhohrab Mnatsakanyan, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for tackling my name with such ease. It's not an easy thing. And indeed, it's a great pleasure to be here, and the opportunity, the reason why we are here is extremely important. We are assessing 10 years of the Eastern Partnership, and we're trying to collectively think about what kind of Eastern Partnership we would want to see for the next 10 years. The interesting part of this is that our talk is happening at a time when we are also having in mind, commemorating, celebrating 30 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall. I represent that generation of a young man who entered life, or adult life, with a sense of optimism, with the triumph of freedom, and the strong belief and commitment that now everything will be all right. Now, as it happened, not everything was all right. But the good thing that happened is that Armenia, along with others, including the 6 Eastern partners, re-established its sovereignty and its independence. When we became independent, I think it was a general consensus in our public that the kind of a country we want is the country which respects freedoms, which respects human rights, which wants to build a model, which is what we know from the European experience. There was a lot of good talk and good intention, but also a lot of problem with that, because we realized that democracy means institutions, that it means tradition, that it means commitment, that it means political will. And over many years since, it was an interesting exercise. We have been working for our membership, for example, in the Council of Europe, and it required a lot of exercise to prepare our institutions for the membership in the Council of Europe. We have been working with the European Union since day one, which has been a very important participant, a supplier to our capacities to build such institutions since day one. But it took some time for us to realize that we are the actual owners of this process, that institution building is a very painful process. We have made many mistakes over 28 years. We have had some very tragic moments in our democracy building. We are a nation which likes to protest. Some of those protests had very sad outcomes. We had a situation in which some commitment to democracy and human rights was not sufficient and was not consolidated and the negative practices which were strangling this process were taking over. So we have known corruption, we have known oligarchy, we have known abuse of power, and as I'm saying, we have also known some tragedy. Then, interestingly, we were also observing an evolution and a generational evolution. I don't know how many of you noted, but there was 2015 in Armenia, and it was the time when somehow the young people came out in the streets, and they had a totally different approach to protest. I sometimes say we had the habit of the Bolshevik style of a protest, that you have to break down everything and build everything anew. And then we had a new culture in which the young generation came out and said our demands are very precise, very specific, and our protest is of a totally different nature. That was a very interesting moment in the evolution of our democratic capacity. And of course, 2018. That was the time when we, the nation, have gone through a very, emotionally charged process. The Velvet Revolution. The Velvet Revolution was peaceful, non-violent. How did it happen? I think the very important part of it is that it was part of the evolution. Evolution, the capacity of the public institutions, of the civil society, of the media, of every such institution in the public, which has shown a degree of maturity to absorb shock. And that's the most important, in my view, most important reason why it was possible to achieve a peaceful, non-violent revolution. The capacity of the public to absorb shock and to achieve result. So when we did the revolution, there was a big question. Who are these people? What the hell is going on in Armenia? And where is the color? And what is the botanical expression of what is happening in Armenia? The Prime Minister lately has defined it in a very funny way. He said, when the revolution happened, some of our partners were saying, who did this revolution? And some of our other partners were saying, if we didn't do that, who else could do that? The trouble, or rather the advantage with the Armenian Revolution is a strictly domestic affair. It was a strictly Armenian matter. There was only one flag waved throughout this, in the streets and squares of Armenia, and that was the Armenian tricolor. And that was when the government stepped in and received a huge mandate from the public. Huge mandate, which was a huge responsibility. Is a huge responsibility because subsequently we had elections, and 71% in an election is not a small thing. It's a mandate, it's a trust, and it's a responsibility. Now, throughout the first months, the government had been absolutely focused on delivering on those most immediate demands reflected in the mandate. The questions of corruption, the questions of equal space, equal opportunities in economic and social life, the question of justice, the question of elections, and the political will has demonstrated its power, that you can address corruption head-on if you have the political will, that you can organize elections which are accepted by the public and by the political forces, and that is when you have shown the political will. But that is not enough. That's only the beginning. It's only a first step. Because consolidating these institutions is the most important challenge and the most important objective. To make sure that, irrespective of political will, the political institutions, the public institutions, do gain strength to sustain the model which is based on respect and strength of democracy, human rights, rule of law. And this is what we live through and live with today in Armenia. We have a very big challenge. For example, the judiciary. The judiciary is one such example in which we need to achieve a genuinely independent, impartial judiciary which enjoys the reasonable trust of the public. There can be no 100% trust, obviously, because in the judiciary someone wins and someone loses, but reasonable trust in the judiciary is the very, very important objective that we have today. And this is where also it shows the way in which we work in our international agenda. Our partnerships with the European Union, with the Council of Europe, with the individual members in the European Union are extremely important exactly for the purpose of consolidating our democratic tradition in Armenia. We have come to a certain level, we're building on, with full confidence we carry on. Then, what is happening if there is no geopolitics in our revolution, and we denied strictly any geopolitical context to our revolution? What is our foreign policy then? Our foreign policy is built in a very careful way to consolidate, to sustain the consolidation of our national security architecture. Now to demonstrate the point, we have two fundamental challenges to our security. One challenge is the unresolved Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And that's a very serious security challenge. The other challenge is the Turkey threat. It's a security threat. The non-existence of relations with Turkey, the consistent denial of justice in the case of Turkey, the failure to build on what we have invested in with what many of you would know, the Zurich protocols, they, in combination with all those some other factors, they represent a serious security threat to Armenia. We have built our security architecture in a way which is complex, which is not easy, but which is justified. We have very important allied relationship with Russia. We work with Russia in various integration processes, including the security arrangement within the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Russia is a security supplier to the region and to Armenia. That is one important dimension. The second important dimension is the relations with the European Union and its member states. Now, when we say consolidating the role of the European Union in consolidating Armenia's development agenda, Armenia's democratic agenda, strengthening its institutions, being a partner and a participant in this process for 28 years, we look at it through the security prism. And the European Union, in that context, represents an important security provider, security supplier to Armenia in that particular context. The other important dimension in our security architecture is the relations with the United States. Also, for 28 years, an important participant in the regional processes, an important participant in Armenia's development agenda, given its role and significance in regional affairs, also a deterrent of the threats, including, for example, the threat of Turkey. Russia, a member of the European Union, France, and the United States, they are the co-chairmanship of the OSCE Minsk Group, which is the established, internationally supported, internationally established and recognized platform mandate within which we are tackling the peaceful resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. In fact, a very rare thing, because despite the many disagreements, Russia, France, and the United States work in in a very good way, in a very good consensus within this format. And that is very valuable. Then, to continue with the way in which we build our architecture, we have very important strategic neighborhood with Georgia and with Iran. Also, with Georgia, we have a very important agenda, very important neighborhood, very dynamic relations. Over this year only, I think we had so many interactions, meetings, discussions on so many issues, and the agenda is from very specific as neighbors who have known each other for many, many centuries. From very specific to very strategic. The same concerns Iran. With Iran also a history of centuries of relations, history of coexistence, history of mutual respect. One of the best examples when Christianity and Islam live together in harmony and mutual respect. We have an important presence in Iran with important cultural heritage there, our compatriots. So this is the architecture within which we sustain our security. Of course, for the sake of time, I will be rather short on. I would rather skip the other dimensions of foreign policy, very important relationship with others in Asia, in the Middle East, in other parts of the world. As a small nation, we invest heavily in multilateralism. We depend on multilateralism. Effective multilateralism is very important. In that context, Eastern Partnership we view exactly as an important platform of multilateral cooperation within this context of the European Union and its Eastern partners. I don't like to say neighbors because I would rather insist that Eastern partners are the eastern flank of Europe because the relationship is built on shared values. On the important question of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, just to make it very clear, from our prism, the issue, the problem concerns the human being. Our focus and our priority is the existential physical security of 150,000 of our compatriots in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, why would I elevate this to such a critical level of existential physical security? We have reasons for that. We have the 70 years of the Soviet rule, or the rule in the times of Soviet Azerbaijan. We have the most devastating time at the beginning of the 90s, when we had a critical situation when there might be no question of Nagorno-Karabakh, because there might be no Nagorno-Karabakh. We are quite cognizant of those facts when 40% of the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh has been taken over, 40% of the population has been wiped out. We have a problem with the continued, as risks of escalation and rhetoric. The epitome of this is the Ramil Safarov case, when an Armenian officer was hacked to death in the middle of the night by an Azeri officer at a training course in Hungary. But that's not the end of the story, that's the beginning of the story. Because subsequently, by some arrangement, he was transferred to Azerbaijan, and he was received as a hero, with glorification. So killing an Armenian deserves glory. That's a very bad message, very bad signal. The attempted aggression in April 2016 is another very clear indication of why we elevate the question to most serious existential physical security threat. We need peace, and there is no alternative to the peaceful settlement of the conflict. Why? Because the alternative is a catastrophe for the entire region. Because Nagorno-Karabakh has the capacity to defend, Armenia has the capacity to defend, and Armenia happens to be the only security guarantor to Nagorno-Karabakh. We are quite cognizant of the capacities of Azerbaijan. So the alternative to peace, easy to conclude what? Therefore, no alternative to the peaceful resolution, and no illusion that the threat of war can have an effect on the progress in negotiations. For us, the absolute priorities are the security and the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. We work within the format of the OSCE Minsk Group Co-Chairmanship. We are quite, sensitive and engaging in understanding the way in which Azerbaijan defines its priorities. The most important challenge is to achieve such balance of parameters which represents compatible and balanced level of commitments on both sides. We are quite confident about our mandate and our support of the people. We are keen to engage in this, but we have to be very sure that we are achieving such level of agreement that is defendable, that will allow us to engage in a dialogue with our public. On Nagorno-Karabakh, I think what I would also add is throughout this 1.5 years since our government stepped in, we have been very active in our engagement in the negotiating process. With my counterpart, with my colleague Elmar Mammadiyarov, the Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan, we have had uninterrupted process of engagements and work within the OSCE Minsk Group Co-Chairmanship. Our leaders, Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Aliyev, had an important opportunity of meeting once in Dushanbe. Then we had a formal meeting that was October last year, then a formal meeting in Vienna in March, and then there was lately another opportunity in Ashgabat within the CIS format, just in the margins, This is very important because what we also pay attention to is, A, we need an environment conducive to peace. You cannot negotiate peace on the one hand and propagate war on the other. We need to prepare our populations for peace. We need to reduce rhetoric. We need to make sure that the environment is different. We need to make sure that we invest in such measures which reduce or deny the risks of escalation. The October meeting, it was not a meeting actually, it was a conversation that, a meeting that in Dushanbe has produced a very tangible result. I cannot claim we're totally satisfied because there are still such violations, but there was a significant reduction of ceasefire violations. And that matters. We were very keen to consolidate this, consolidate further to make sure that the peace process is taking place within an environment that is conducive to peace. We need to make sure there is more contact. Now we have some programs and hopefully, some ideas and hopefully that we discuss with Azerbaijan, with co-chairs, hopefully we will have the opportunity to show such results very soon. We spoke about journalists, we spoke about other such measures. So hopefully we will be able to produce some results. So this is where we are with Nagorno-Karabakh. And it is with full cognizance that peace is absolutely critical for all the parties, without exception. Peace is absolutely critical for the region, for each of our nations. Coming back to, I know I'm approaching now the limit. And just to finish, I want to come back to what we're here for. And that is the relations with the European Union and the Eastern Partnership. As we had good opportunities today to talk about our, taking stock of the past 10 years, trying to sketch out the next 10 years. There are very interesting ideas on this, very important structured consultation taking place about how to build the next 10 years. There are interesting ideas that we have been supplying the partners. I know Ukraine have, and all others have, shared their views and their proposals, their ideas. We have done so on our part. Mr. Hahn, the Commissioner for Neighborhood Policy, and Federica Mogherini, they have supplied us with their ideas. Sweden and Poland, as the initiators of the Eastern Partnership, have also been quite active on this. I think we are building quite a shape of the next 10 years. But I think what is also quite important here is that the past 10 years are different, were different. I started with 30 years back, the sense of optimism. And you remember the end of history kind of mentality. And the history happens to be back with vengeance now. That we are in a condition, in a situation, in an environment of a dramatic change in what is happening in the world. And it is very important to be cognizant and to understand how we absorb this and how we build our commitments within this platform to measure it against the change that is happening in the world. So we have had an opportunity to talk about the way in which we square the development and security concerns and agenda of the nations in this format. In this format of consultations, discussions. The capacity, I think, is that the next 10 years is also a test to our collective capacities, and it's not just about the Eastern partners. It's about what we call common European values, common European commitments, our belief in democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. This is a test that to what extent will we be able to be faithful to what we have declared as common shared values against the pressures of the global nature. There are specific tools, instruments about the way in which we consolidate small and medium industry enterprises or digital economies or whichever other way we use all the important mechanisms and instruments. But I think the big challenge is sustainability of values in building these relations of common Europe. Europe, which has known peace after the Second World War for 75 years, but which in fact shows some challenge. Sometimes is it the limit of the human memory to remember the calamity, the strong leadership that we need, which is cognizant of the alternative of peace? This is also a dimension of Eastern Partnership. As I'm saying, Eastern Partnership is a multilateral platform. And it is about Europe. It's not neighborhood, it's Europe. I will stop there. I think I have consumed my 30 minutes. And I'm really very grateful for your attention. And I'm really glad and I'm looking forward to hear my colleague, Vadim, and I'm sure we will have a good interaction on this. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Sweden.
I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the auditorium and reflections, and I was thinking we could turn towards the auditorium immediately. We will have microphones for you, my colleagues. Please state your name and also try to be brief. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to inform you about the Minsk. You asked what's happened to Minsk. Minsk produced one of the best refrigerators. We have a history that our conflict, they call it frozen conflict, because in means refrigerator keeping decades. You should expect the same, I think. This is what about means. I have a question to Mr. Mnatsakanyan. How we know former Armenian President Robert Kocharyan arrested because he killed Armenian children in 2008 during the protests.
Yes. Also, you forgot to state your name, so for the record.
My name is Asimullah Zadeh. I'm from the Parliament of Azerbaijan. And also, we know that in Karabakh, in city of Khojaly, a lot of children and women were massacred and killed, and Robert Kocharyan committed a lot of military crimes. Are you ready to work together with us an international tribunal for just research of this type of military crimes? Also, not only mountain part of Karabakh, several regions of Azerbaijan and the occupation, and there are a resolution of United Nations Security Council, European Parliament, Council of Europe about ethnic cleansing, and I think that maybe one of the best steps toward a peace, just mutually together investigate all this type of military crimes and start move toward a peace, because again we have refrigerator and Armenia more pretend about the negotiation than we moved forward toward each other.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. You made a very interesting point. You said, are we prepared to investigate together what?
Military crimes committed.
Committed by who?
But a criminal who killed also Armenians in Yerevan.
And how about Azerbaijan?
Azerbaijan ready.
Ready for what? Investigate the Armenian crimes. No, not the Azeri crimes.
You occupied.
We occupy. You are saints. You haven't done anything. Have you heard about Baku? Have you heard about Sumgayit? Have you heard about Maraga? Have you heard about the occupation of the Sharman region? Have you heard about the occupation of the part of the Martaket region? Have you heard about the part of the occupation of the Martuni region? Do you want me to continue?
Let's work.
Do you want us to?
Work together.
This is exactly the point. Are you prepared to reduce rhetoric? Are you prepared to understand our concerns? Are you prepared to engage in such dialogue? Or it is your truth or no truth? Or it is your way or no way? We will never have peace if we're maximalists. That's the whole point that I was making about preparing populations. You were talking about some problems that concern us. Don't pretend to be saints.
We did not occupy Armenia.
No, excuse me, I was saying there is a question of security. A question of security that is the only security arrangement that doesn't allow the resurgence of aggression, occupation, the words that you use so often. Aggression, occupation, and physical, existential physical security threat to our compatriots, 150,000 Armenians. They are humans, they have names, they have families, they have homes, they have their physical security concerns, and there is no other security arrangement than what it is today. This is what the negotiations are about, how to come to something which is not taking us to a maximalist demands by one party at the expense of the other. We will never achieve, whether it is a refrigerator from Minsk or whichever other part of the world, that will be a frozen conflict if we do not engage in a constructive way. Thank you.
I will now use the moderator's prerogative to conclude the debate about Nagoya.
Thank you.
So we have a few more hands. I have a lady in the back, and also, sir, you can take your question first, and then we have the question from the lady in the back. Yes. Try to be succinct and. Okay. Oh, there was some confusion. Okay,
yeah.
so.
My name is Mattia, and I'm also from Azerbaijan, and we were closely following events in Armenia, like revolution, and we had some positive expectations that the new Armenian leadership will be much more constructive when it comes to Karabakh conflict, because we all understand that it is vital, the peaceful resolution of the conflict is vital for peace and stability and prosperity of the region, especially in the European region. But when I listen to you and to Nikol Pashinyan in DC, in Brussels, in other European capitals, I hear what you exactly said now, that you pretend to be saints. For example, you're, okay.
Please.
And okay, my question is very brief. How can you talk about peace when the Prime Minister of one country, of the EUP country, visits internationally recognized territories of the other EUP country and says that Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenia, and that's it. And also he calls for unification. So how can you expect peaceful resolution if you take complete opposite actions?
We have heard the argument. We will have one more question, and then you can reply to the Nagorno-Karabakh. That's I promise it will be the final. And then we take the second question also from your side. Yes, please.
My name is Valery. I represent Minsk. I would like to inform my colleague from Azerbaijan that Minsk present premises, present conditions, present table for your negotiators to hold these negotiations. And we, I mean Minsk, don't take part and don't participate in your negotiations. That means that it's your problem how you skillful, how you can hold negotiations, and how you can achieve result. That's the problem. If you don't like Minsk, please, you can have a more favorable...
Sorry, can you please try to ask the question?
And as for, not question, but I would like to say that Minsk, as a capital of Belarus, is interested in stable development and prosperous development of our region. And that's why it's very friendly attitude to decide all problems which exists now in our region.
Okay.
It's our friendly attitude. That's enough.
We are aware of this now. Okay, so I promise you, if there's one more question which on this same topic, we will have to shut it down, because we would like to continue the discussion about the Eastern Partnership and the reforms and the other things that will also have a chance to be discussed here. We had the mics here were asked, we had a lady in the back who was asking for the mic. Is there anybody who has the mic at the moment? Okay, yes, please, there. And on this side, yes, please. Right. So, please, commence.
I hold the lecture. Actually, well, no, my question is not about saying something about that, but I just really, it's a good opportunity for me to ask Minister. He mentioned about the January, well, he said that preparing people for peace, that's extremely important. And this, after the statement in January, was emphasized. I'm really interested what has been done so far in Armenia in this regard. It's
in Armenia?
Well,
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Got it.
It was about, if I have an opportunity also to ask our MFA, I would ask. I'm just asking from your perspective, what has been done in Armenia or for the region in order to be
Okay, I wasn't aware of.
First of all, I want to refer to something very important, refer to what the distinguished member of Parliament of Belarus was saying. His message, I think, was very important. The message was about the sense of ownership of the peace process by those who are the actual stakeholders. You're absolutely right. It is first of all for Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh to bear the responsibility and to find a solution to the peaceful resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And that also refers to the question that I think Mr. Bakhtia was asking. Look, the way in which the Prime Minister was putting the message of a peace which is acceptable to the people of Armenia, to the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and the people of Azerbaijan was a message that deserves to be reciprocated. That is a message which reflects on one very important premise in finding the solution. And that is that the capacity of the parties to look at the concerns of the other party and calculate that balance of commitments in a way that reflects the concerns of each party. That is the sense of having a solution which is acceptable to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, to the people of Armenia, people of Nagorno-Karabakh, people of Azerbaijan. I think this is something which also builds on what the next question was about. The next question was about. That is the consistent test. The consistent test. Now, we have, as I've indicated, there are some proposals, some ideas on which we are trying to build. The way in which we can, depoliticize such people-to-people contact. Like we are having this politicized contact. We're trying to, blame each other. We're trying to be, to be ignorant of the other party, concerns. This is what this demonstration of a politicized discussion is exactly what we do not need. And I mentioned journalists. There are some various ideas, but we need, and there is a good understanding on both parties now that we're talking with my colleague, the Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan, to do it in a way, in a careful way, that we can sustain what we're trying to do now. Sustain that, creating the platform in which some experience can be generated of a careful experience so that we can continue and build on it. That, the journalist example I mentioned, that we can start generating a different narrative in our region, so far as the peaceful resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is concerned. Thank you.
All right. For Mr. Mnatsakanyan, I was wondering, you didn't speak a lot about the Eurasian customs.
Yes.
Armenia has joined a customs
yes.
bloc that was initiated by Moscow. And Armenia has also taken a step towards not as far as Ukraine, but still in its negotiations with the Eastern Partnership as well. How do you see these two blocks or these two initiatives as complementing or
yes.
as contradictory?
Thank you very much for that question. In the broader context, it is true that it's our foreign policy requires very active engagement and exercise of deep care, because the biggest challenge we have is not to build relations with one partner at the expense of the other. And obviously when you have such turbulence in the world and that amongst your important primary partners you have a degree of disagreements, of course it's always a big challenge. Now, so far as the Eurasia Union is concerned, Eurasia Union is a free access, free market of 200 million, capable to pay for goods, capable to accept your products, and we're very happy to be there. We are building, within this Eurasia Union, we are as participants, as as members of the Eurasia Union. We are participating in the establishment and development of the regulatory framework of the Eurasia Union. We are members of the WTO. We have our set of relations and set of agreements with the European Union. We have the opportunity to combine all those in a way that the regulatory framework is built in a way which is compatible to our other opportunities. Of course, again, as I'm saying, don't take this as an easy task, but this is what we choose to do. With the European Union, yes, we have negotiated a comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement. As someone who has been negotiating previously the association agreement between Armenia and the European Union, I have a fairly good idea about what's what, and basically what we have negotiated is very much association agreement minus DCFTA. The SEPA has very, advanced chapters on political cooperation, justice, freedoms cooperation, and so on and so forth, and most importantly, sectoral cooperation. And within that sectoral cooperation, we also have this exercise of regulatory approximation with the European Union. So this is the way in which, again, some of the members in the Eurasia Union are members of the WTO, as I say. The rules of the WTO apply in the Eurasia Union, and the regulatory framework in which we are capable to combine all those is a challenge that we take, because we also recognize the good opportunity. The opportunity of having an access to a 200 million market and benefiting from it. So this is where we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, okay, so very good. I have two more questions. The gentleman there, on the left, yes, on the left side, and then, yes. So, and then on this side, I would like to distribute the questions a bit more. So, okay, so to you, sir, in the middle. Thank you. You can have the second question. Okay, please.
Yes, my name is Jörg Detters, and journalist, and I have a question to you, Mr. Mnatsakanyan. What are the latest developments at the Turkish-Syrian border, and Turkey is taking over the region there, mean to you, and also the, as it seems, farewell to the idea of an independent Kurd state? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Syria, the conflict in Syria, the crisis in Syria, is of direct concern and relevance to Armenia. With Syria, we have a long history of relations. We have presence in Syria, significant institutional presence of people, institutionally established in Syria, cultural heritage. They are citizens of Syria. They are the civil population, civilian population of Syria, of Armenian origin. We, of course, have a direct interest and direct concern about what's happening and how it affects the civilian population in Syria, and how it affects particularly also our competitors, those who are also of Armenian origin. So our Armenians are concentrated mostly in such areas as Aleppo, Damascus, Kesab, and also Gamishli. Gamishli is the place with about 420 families, Armenian families, about 3,000 people, some more in some other parts towards further towards northeast. Of course, when the developments have taken such turn that they resulted in the invasion by Turkey, invasion of the northern part of Syria, of course, it raised concerns for us as well. We have been working very closely with our compatriots through the institutions. We have diplomatic presence in Damascus. We have Consulate General in Aleppo. We provide humanitarian assistance, humanitarian mission we have in Aleppo with doctors and deminers. We have been in consultation with various partners to just assess and see the way in which we can be helpful to the civilian population of Syria. As I am saying, we're very careful not to make a distinction, because our compatriots are Syrian citizens. of Armenian origin. And our concern is about the civilian population of Syria in general as well. So at the moment, it so happens that it seriously concerned that the declared so-called security zone was aimed at 440 kilometers, to extend to 440 kilometers to of the northern Syrian border. Now, further developments are such that this area is limited to about 100 plus 110, 120 kilometers between Tel Aviv and Ras Al Ain. We intend to move on with further steps in being helpful in strictly humanitarian terms, being helpful to the civilian population of Syria. We, as I'm saying, we're in contact with all the relevant partners, both bilaterally and also multilaterally. We recognize the use of the UN agencies in that. So this is more or less in where we stand, where we are. It is a matter of concern, has been always a matter of concern, because again, just to understand clearly, Armenia, the Syrian citizens of Armenian origin, that population has been well over 100,000 people. Well over 100,000 people before the start of the crisis. Again, institutional, with heritage, with presence, in every sense. Now it's less than 20,000. Armenia has been home to 22,000 of these people in Armenia. We have been through a phase in which we have accommodated them. Legally speaking, they are refugees. Of course, in our minds, they are our compatriots and they are Armenians. But to accommodate, absorb them, requires, action, because after all, they come from a different country. They had to be accommodated in terms of education, health, social security, housing, employment, business, and so on and so forth. So that experience we have, and we carry on having a very careful monitoring and engagement, as I'm saying, dialogue with all the relevant partners to make sure that we assess correctly the way, the threats, the risks, and the way in which we can be of help. Thank you.
Okay, so please, sir.
Hello, my name is Mikhail Ovansyan. I'm from Armenia. My question is actually for both ministers. First of all, thank you for your quite comprehensive introductions. And it's quite symptomatic that both of you have mentioned security and stability as, while speaking about the past and the future of this partnership, you prioritize the security and stability issues. So my question relates to the substance of the Eastern Partnership for the coming period of time after 2020. What do you think the exact mechanisms, tools, or maybe some additional mechanisms and tools should be applied in the coming period of the Eastern Partnership, both on bilateral and multilateral dimensions? Because when we are speaking about Eastern Partnership, we're jumping from one topic to another. I mean, from both, so we're talking first about the bilateral relations, and here we have different kind of framework agreements and stuff like that. And then we're talking about the Eastern Partnership as some kind of region where multilateral processes can also take place. So what's, in your opinion, these processes could look like in the coming period for the Eastern Partnership? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's a great question, and it will also be our last, because we are approaching the last minutes of our lecture.
A very simple answer. We do have mechanisms at our disposal to improve our relations with the European Union and with individual partners within the European Union. We would take full advantage of ministerials, for example, meetings of Eastern Partnership. Nothing wrong with that. I don't believe that we would find better venue where we can discuss. But at the same time, we, for example, benefiting from the summits of EU with Ukraine, specifically for Ukraine. We just had the last one in July. So we are not expecting that in the Eastern Partnership we would found some unique mechanism. Also, if it is given value and is added value for anything within the Eastern Partnership, we will be happy to have it. At the same time, we also see some risks of the Eastern Partnership. For example, ideas that why would the European Union take everything they have as the financial assistance and technical assistance and put it in a big basket which will be called Eastern Partnership? And then out of this basket to finance and to help and to give some whatever the expertise and everything. We believe that this is a bit risky to have it in one basket and then set it aside for the Eastern partners. We would be happy to have the capacity of building our own relations with each and every partner, with the European Union, and again, if it is Eastern Partnership, let it be so. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think more or less along the same lines, with some, of course, twists, but of course, to recognize that in relations with the European Union, we have an important fundamental legal framework, the foundation, which is the SEPA. We have various other formats, arrangements bilaterally, which consolidate the relations with the European Union. We have the necessary platforms to advance this bilateral agenda. The Partnership Council, the Partnership Committee. In fact, I have here two members of our parliament. They are a very important party to this process through the Parliamentary Partnership Committee, and so on and so forth. There are various settings in which the civil society is engaged bilaterally, and so on and so forth. Also part of the institutional part of the implementation of SEPA, civil society. They have their own institutional setup for that. Now, in that context, why Eastern Partnership? Why would we would need that? I think this is exactly the context of a multilateral platform, which we need so much, all of us, as within the pan-European architecture. A platform which allows us to sustain cooperation and a sense of identity, a sense of shared responsibility based on shared values, but shared responsibility. So Eastern Partnership is as much important to the European Union as the European Union is important to the Eastern Partnership. And again, my claim is that it is about the broader European architecture. We have all kinds of, and Europe is one of those regions in the world which is best developed with its regional institutional capacities. The European Union, other regional organizations, which are important platforms. And this is very important. For us, Armenia, a smaller nation, and Europe is mostly made up of such nations, that multilateralism is an instrument of sustaining our development and security agenda through international engagement and international cooperation. So the summit, in that sense, is a very good way that the Eastern Partnership summits with the European Union or other such settings are very important, because it is also important to extend the sense of the eastern flank of Europe, the sense of the Eastern partners within the broader Europe, extend it to all other parts of Europe. Because if you have this conversation in Portugal, you will not be, for example, in Portugal, you will not be impressing many listeners about Eastern Partnership, because their priorities are, focuses towards the southern neighborhood, if I put it that way. But sustaining that common sense of partnership and cooperation is what those summits and those settings give us the opportunity to. Of course, I mentioned Portugal as the southeastern flank of Europe, a southwestern flank of Europe, speaking from the southeastern flank. I took this example. Of course, our Portuguese friends are very well aware about Eastern Partnership. Of course, they are good supporters of Eastern Partnership. Of course, we work closely with them. Thank you.
And we thank both of the ministers with a round of applause. Thank you very much.